folks. You're listening to the Jobs Podcast. I am your host, Tim Hendricks. Your time is valuable. I'm not going to waste it. Let's get right to the interview. Hey, folks. Thanks for joining me today. Our guest, Jeff, I had to write all his accomplishments down. Let me see here. We have Navy SEAL. We have CIA. We have Firefighter, and now he's a Battalion Chief. He is an author of a fictional novel, The Ahava Decision. He is a contributor and writer for Sandbox.com. He is also a co-author with his father, Frank Butler, and Kevin O'Connor for TC3, Tell Them Yourself, It's Not Your Day to Die. And he is also on the Fire Department Honor Guard. Well, good grief, Jeff. When are you running for Pope? My goodness.
Tim, you left out the most important part of my CV, which is arch nemesis of Tim Hendricks.
Oh, no. I didn't leave that out. I'm trying to ignore it.
Very good. We'll put that aside for the purposes of this podcast.
Oh, well, thank you for joining me today. That's great.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's start with the early story, the origins of Jeff, and give us a little snapshot about your childhood and what brought you to join the military and go from there.
Yeah. All right. Well, man, you got to rewind back to a better, simpler time known as the mid-'70s, when a young, pasty-skinned, redheaded Irish-American kid was born in Augusta, Georgia. Actually, my dad was in, so it really might have to go back to my parents, because my dad was in the military. He was a Navy SEAL also, which is really how I got interested in that community, and then left that community, but stayed in the Navy and went to med school. And he was in medical school when I was born in Augusta. That's why I was born there. He was at the Medical College of Georgia. We went to Jacksonville, Florida after that, then Panama City, Florida, then Bethesda, Maryland, and then back to Florida to Pensacola, where they have lived ever since. But all that was because of his medical and Navy career. So that's where I was first introduced to the Navy, and did most of my school age years in Florida with a brief interlude in Maryland, and graduated from high school in Pensacola, and kind of got on my way from there.
What? So you went to college, I assume, after, or did you go straight into the military after high school?
Yeah, so I graduated high school and I was awarded a Navy ROTC scholarship to Georgetown. So I had to apply for that scholarship and then apply to Georgetown. I had to get into both, obviously, to use it, and then did my 4 years of college, during which I did a bunch of ROTC stuff where they train you how to be an officer and how to be in the Navy. And then I graduated in May of 99, and then was commissioned that same month, and went out to California to SEAL training that July of 99. So that's kind of how the ROTC pipeline works. It's just one of the pipelines into the Navy as an officer.
You already had the Navy SEAL job in your sights. What I don't understand is when you join the military, you start as an officer if you have a 4-year degree, correct?
You go through an officer pipeline. You apply to be an officer, and then they accept you or not. And then if they accept you, there's really one of three ways. There's OCS, which is Officer Candidate School. So they can take a civilian off the street, and he can go, or she can go straight to OCS, Officer Candidate School, or that you can go through ROTC, where they pay your 4 years of regular college, and then you are commissioned as an officer right after that. Or you can go through one of the academies for the Navy. It'd be the Naval Academy, and you can graduate from the Naval Academy and come out right as an officer. That's really and then there is a fourth way where you're enlisted first in the Navy. You just sign up, go to boot camp, you're enlisted, and then you get commissioned from your enlisted position in the Navy. So it's really 4 ways, I guess, to become an officer in the military.
You've entered the military as an officer. How does the transition from I'm in the military, I'm an officer, I now want to go be a Navy SEAL? Is that you apply and you go through a selection process, or are you hand selected, or how do they kind of find the people for that unique role?
So I knew I wanted to do it around like 8th or 9th grade. Not everybody knows that young, but so you have to know pretty early before the selection time comes. So the selection for we call it a warfare specialty in the Navy. Everybody is put into a community. Their senior year, they find out what their community is going to be. So my ROTC unit, say it was, 30 of us that graduated that year, maybe like 15 would be going into the surface warfare community, which was driving ships, a handful going into submarines, a handful going into pilot, a few going into Marines, and then just like one of me going into SEAL training. So you apply for that warfare specialty, and they select you to get into. So they say, yes, we're willing to accept you into BUDS and to SEAL training, and then you go to training. So it's absolutely an application process separate from the getting into the Navy. And it's just another application process essentially and another selection process.
So you've been selected to join that aspect of the military. Can you give me kind of a Cliff Notes version of what it's like from the beginning of I am going to be a Navy SEAL and I've been accepted into this to, I believe BUDS is the last kind of gauntlet you have to go through. Is that correct?
BUDS is it is the gauntlet to go through to become a SEAL. After BUDS, there's a few follow-on specialty sort of trainings, but you're in by then. BUDS is the thing that really weeds people out.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say the preparation should be starting long before you get selected. You can't start getting ready when you get selected because you'll die. You'll never make it if you do that. I mean, I was getting ready for all 4 years of college with the hope and idea that I would be able to go to the training. I just had to assume I was going to make it and try really hard. And if I didn't, then I just would have been in really good shape and had for no reason.
Okay, so that brings up a question is, what if someone is listening and let's say they're in the 10th grade and they go, I want to be a Navy SEAL. Let's throw some advice out there from the physical standpoint, the mental standpoint. What are those intangibles, those soft skills that separate someone from making it versus not making it?
Yeah, well, so it always has to start with a baseline of physical conditioning, which is, and there's really, it's pretty simple. It's simple to say and simple to categorize, but not simple to do.
Right.
You have to be able to swim. You have to be able to run. You have to be able to handle your body weight, which, is often called calisthenics, but like pull-ups, push-ups, those kind of things. There was very little free weight stuff in the SEALs, but you have to be able to do all the running, swimming, calisthenics. And then you have to be able to do it. And there are some other breath hold, water, comfort. You have to be extremely comfortable in the water. So there's some ways to prepare for that. That's really the main physical preparation. And it's a lot. I mean, it took me, like I said, 4 years to kind of get where thought I had a really good chance. But then the mental preparation, the mental is the biggest part of making it through BUDS. And everybody kind of says that, but they don't really get it until they get there, where you have to literally go in with the mindset of they're either going to kill me or I'm going to fail. Like I'll fail runs, I'll fail swim times. And that's, to me, that was an acceptable, not acceptable. I could have swallowed that if I didn't pass everything. Then I at least know, like, okay, I just didn't prepare enough. But they're either going to kill me, fail me, but there's no way in hell I'm going to quit. Like they'll have to force me out. And as long as you go in with that mindset, like this is all I'm doing, this is the only option I have in my life, they're going to have to kill me to get me out of here. That's really what it takes to make it through. I mean, it's honestly, that's it. I mean, that's 98% of it. Once you've established the baseline of physical capability, most people do that come in these days. Everybody these days, because the internet is so easy to find information about SEAL training and how to prepare, what it entails. Everybody kind of comes in pretty physically prepared, which I guess wasn't really the case like in the 70s when my dad went through. People would show up and have no idea what they were getting into. Well, these days people know, but it's still, the attrition is still 80% because so many people quit or get hurt or just can't make those times.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you can watch a video, but until you're in the middle of that, where these people control every aspect of your lives, you're, without sleep, constant physical exertion, being able to focus and think under stressful situations, that's completely different than just thinking you can do it and showing up.
Yeah, there's a few great documentaries on SEAL training and some great online videos, and they all give a good taste, but there's just no way to convey the sheer misery and the everyday sense of doom that you experience when you're in it. I mean, it's just impossible. You can't convey that on a TV screen. How do you convey on a TV screen just the constant sand in every crevice of your body that's just wearing away your soul? You just can't until you're in it. You just don't know. And you're like, oh, this is what people mean by hell on earth. I get it now.
But that's a week long, your hell week. Is that right?
Well, hell week is just 5 days of the 6 months of training. So it's definitely a huge crucible. You make it through in BUDS, but there's there's a good number of people that make it through hell week and still don't make it through the rest of the training because there's a bunch of other very difficult things that follow it.
Is the sleep deprivation the biggest I guess, is that something that people don't realize? I'm not used to this. I can lift weights and run and do calisthenics and do all the stuff physically they're asking. But when I haven't slept, but I don't know how often they let you sleep, very minimally over 2 or 3 days, it catches up to people and the weaknesses start to show up.
No, the sleep, you don't sleep. I slept about, so your amount of sleep in Hell Week it's 5 days. So over that 5 days, I slept probably 45 minutes total. But
Jeez.
if you win a bunch of races, there's all kinds of like buds instructors love competitions. And that one of the famous sayings there is it pays to be a winner. So if you say we had this big paddle around Coronado Island, it's some long paddle. I mean, it's a nightmare. But if you win that, you may get to sleep like 30 minutes right there at a stretch or maybe even 45, and you're going to probably get max 2 hours of sleep over. There's still the most you're ever going to get is 2 hours. But if you never win a race, you're always dragging in your last, you may sleep zero because you get a little bit of sleep depending on how you do. So the sleep that I believe you're not legally responsible for your actions after the Wednesday of Hell Week. That's no joke. I believe that's what they say. They have to be with us 24/7 after Wednesday of Hell Week because we're just zombified. At that point, it's really just a matter of, again, I'm not going to quit. The sleep, it sucks. You absolutely want nothing but sleep. You just want to shut your eyes and do nothing else. But as long as you can just keep pushing through. But there's no, there's no physical, there's no 4 mile timed run at the end of Hell Week. Like they're not expecting you to be at top physical condition during Hell Week. They are just expecting you to survive. But then, the timed runs and swims and all happen every other week of buds, and you have to pass those every week.
When you made it through, how long did you sleep when you were finally released? I'm sure they give you a few days at least or a week off after you're done.
Tim, so naive. We finished it. I mean, this is seared into my brain for the rest of my life. We finished at about noon on Friday, and we started Sunday evening. So we finished at noon on Friday. They handed me a 2-liter Gatorade and a whole pizza, and they said, and you're confined to your barracks. And they said, go back to your room. And they said, eat the whole pizza and drink all the Gatorade. Well, like half the people can't because they're so tired. So I did. I ate all my pizza. I drank the whole Gatorade, and I slept for, I want to say 17 hours. I woke up. I woke up a couple times to pee, obviously, but then I did wake up and like walk right next door in my barracks to my buddy's room. He was asleep in his bed with his open box of pizza on top of his chest. Ants were all over it, and he was just sound asleep. And I don't think he woke up for like 20 hours.
Good grief.
Yeah, so he woke up the next day on Saturday. I went out for a giant meal with my dad. He was in town, and a couple of my buds' classmates. And then we had Sunday off, and we started back on Monday.
Oof.
So we had 2 days off. Now, that first week after is a little lighter. They do ease up a little bit, but they still get you wet and sandy and uncomfortable. You just don't do as much. There's no timed run or anything that week.
The timed runs that you have, is it one specific time they're wanting you to meet, or does it change all the time? Or
yeah, first phase, it's a 4-mile beach run in pants and boots, but you do get to do it on hard packed sand. So it's like 2 miles down, 2 miles back. So it starts. The times don't sound horrible to a runner or anything, or just if you had like this was all you're doing today, the times don't sound bad. So I want to say it was like 30 minutes in first phase, and then it was down to and then it's 28. I think, in second phase, then it's like 26 or something in third phase that you have to do the 4 miles. So in and of by themselves in a standalone world, they're not that difficult. But boots and pants on the beach all day long, you're doing physical activity for 6 straight months. It's tiring. And I never failed a run. I never even came close to failing a run, but I was always pretty close on swims, like busting my butt to get the swim times down.
Are you swimming in the ocean most of the time, or in a pool, or for these time things?
Oh, the time swims are always in the ocean. We did some conditioning swims in the pool, but mostly we swam in the open water.
All right. So you're done with your Navy training or your SEAL training. You're a SEAL. How long did you do that for in the military before you decided I was going to leave the military and move on to other things?
I only did 4 years. I think the average SEAL is about 6 years. The war on terror had just started in 2001, and then the Iraq War in 2003. And my major in college was international security studies, like international politics, terrorism and stuff.
Mhm.
And then I kind of knew from a couple years after 9/11 being in the teams that that the CIA had stuff going on and that might be a better fit for me. So I put in to go to the CIA straight from the SEALs. So it was kind of a mix between family, military life's hard on the family, especially the SEALs, and I was newly married. So it was kind of a mix of wanting a little better family life balance and then wanting to use my degree. And I just thought that the work was going to be more interesting in the war on terror at the CIA at that time.
So how do you apply for the CIA? I mean, is it like you just meet some guy in a parking lot somewhere and you get the application, or do you just go to their website and fill it out, or what's the process typically like?
I think there's various ways that they recruit some. So they'll go out to college campuses or places and they might personally recruit depending on what their needs are. But I just applied online. I actually applied there was a huge hiring boom there after 9/11, obviously. So they were hiring just left and right. They hired tons of people out of the military. So I actually applied for both a graduate school internship program. So my alternative is that I had to have a backup plan, obviously, if the CIA didn't hire me. So I applied to graduate school and the CIA at the same time. And then as part of that, at the CIA, I applied for a graduate intern program. Essentially, I was like, okay, if I don't get hired, I'll go to grad school and be an intern at the CIA, and that'll get me in the back door. But then I also just applied to the operations department of the CIA. So I got a phone call, and I I don't know why, but my brain immediately thought this was the intern program they were calling me about. So I was real nonchalant and like almost kind of blew them off. I was like, well, I haven't gotten accepted to grad school yet, so I don't really know if this is going to work out. And you could tell the dude was like, wanted to be like, hey man, this is the CIA calling you to offer you a job. Like, why don't you, treat this seriously? And it dawned on me and I was like, oh crap. I was like, are you from the operations division? He's like, yeah. So I almost blew it right away by thinking I was getting a call that I wasn't getting. But then it's just a whole series of interviews and background checks and more interviews and in-person interviews and phone interviews. It's a long process to get hired there for obvious reasons.
Sure. When you start, do they have their own academy that they send you through, like Quantico for the FBI kind of a thing?
Yeah, so I got hired by the Directorate of Operations, it was called at the time. I think it's called that again now. For a while, it was called the National Clandestine Service. It's the ops section of the CIA. So if you get hired for the DO, as we call it, you go through a field training course that they put on, which is essentially like CIA 101 for clandestine CIA officers. So I went through that.
I mean, I'm sure there's a physical component to it, but it's probably more cerebral than physical. Like the military there was a lot of physical stuff involved. Is the CIA similar, or is it different in their training?
No, it was almost no physical, well, other than not much sleep and like long nights but it's all tradecraft training. So how to be a spy and how to handle assets overseas clandestinely and all the tricks of the trade and how to write CIA reports and how intelligence writing works. And I mean, it's just all the things that go with that job. So not a ton of it was fit. I did do some physical stuff when I deployed with the CIA to Afghanistan. If you're going to a war zone, they put you through some more physical stuff and shooting and driving after your basic. But the basic tradecraft training is really is more. It's not office training, but because you're out on the street a lot doing stuff, but it's not physically demanding.
It's more exploding cigars and watches with laser beams and things of that.
Right. Yeah, how to rig up a exploding cell phone.
Yeah. One question I forgot to ask you: if someone wanted to get into the Navy and end up being a Navy SEAL, what kind of pay can they expect? I mean, I'm not asking for an exact quote, but what's the maybe?
Anybody can go I would assume anybody can go online and look up the pay scales so the pay scales are different for officers and enlisted.
Okay.
I don't know what an officer in the Navy starts at right now. I can't imagine it's less than like $50,000 a year for a new ensign. It could be more than that. But by the time I left, the pay is really good in the SEAL team. So you get everything you do in the military that's specialized, you kind of get paid for. So I got demolition pay, I got dive pay, hazardous duty pay, all these things on parachute pay, all on top of my baseline officer salary. So the pay was pretty great. I never had, and obviously free medical care. And when you deployed overseas, your housing was paid. I mean, I always tell people the federal government is a good job. There's lots of benefits to it.
When you moved over to the CIA, was the pay in line with that, or was it higher?
No, I took a pretty big pay cut because I kind of restarted over like you do when you change careers. You always have to start a little lower than you want to. But it built back up pretty quick. Like I surpassed my Navy salary after maybe 5 years in the CIA, maybe 4 years, something like that. I was kind of back where I had been before, so it didn't take me too long to catch back up.
Where did you spend? And I don't know how much you can talk. I obviously cut me off if I'm, divulging secrets. So I don't want to get a mysterious phone call in the middle of the night for this interview. But where did you spend most of your time when you were in the CIA? Was it overseas, United States?
So my career track was called a collection management officer. And it just gets real in the weeds, so I won't go too far in the weeds. But in the Directorate of Operations, there's different little tracks, and I picked one on purpose that I had the opportunity to have a little bit more time at headquarters in DC if I wanted it without any kind of penalty against me. So there's some career tracks where they just expect you to be overseas constantly, one tour after another. Well, I didn't. I wanted to have the freedom to come back, so that I picked a career track that was based on that. So I was at headquarters. The training took about a year, and then I was at headquarters for maybe 6 months or so after that, learning an account, and then deployed for a year to Afghanistan. Was back for maybe 5 months, and then deployed again to Europe for a 2-year tour. So it kind of went like that, where you'd be gone for a year or two and then come back. And you could, depending on what I wanted, I could have stayed at headquarters for two straight years if I had wanted to. But then after my Italy tour, I left shortly after that, so I wasn't at headquarters a ton.
Your time in Italy, I assume you had to learn to speak Italian?
I did. I got back from Afghanistan, and they were like, "Hey, here's your Italian instructor, and you're going to spend 5 hours a day with him for the next 3 months. Good luck."
Oh my goodness.
I learned all my Italian in 3 months.
So you're obviously getting past a conversational level. I mean, do they teach you about accent and whatnot? So is the goal to sound like you're Italian? I mean, you don't look Italian, but
no, that's an almost impossible test. So that's called a native level speaker.
Okay.
And you can take it for years and not sound native. Really, the only people that ever sound native in a language means they kind of grew up with it. Like maybe they had one, in this case, one Italian parent, one American parent, or something like that. But the goal was really to get to a level where you can carry on sophisticated conversation about more complicated topics than where's the bathroom and which way to the biblioteca.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's nuance, there's slang and things that you would need to learn to really be effective conversationally.
And that stuff it's almost impossible to pick that stuff up until you get to the location. Then you pick up, you pick a lot of that slang and stuff up once you're there. So it'd be like moving into Missouri and as a non-native English speaker and having to learn all these weird pronunciations of towns that should be pronounced one way and really are pronounced a whole different way. Like you wouldn't know that till you got here. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's kind of the same way.
So you're in the CIA for, was it 6 or 7 years? Is that right?
7 years. Yeah.
7 years. What was the spark that led you to leave the CIA, and then kind of how did you end up in the fire service?
That was, again, just family stuff like that. Shocker. The CIA life also not great for family life, which, looking back, it was probably self-evident. But it just wasn't, I could tell it just was real disruptive. And then I just had family stuff going on. So it ended up relocating here to Missouri. And then just because of a bunch of family dynamics was decided, okay, I'm going to stay here in Missouri. Now I've got to find a job. And literally firefighting was the only thing as I looked around, the only thing that I was like, well, that sounds fun. And I'll do this for the next 30 years. I couldn't think of anything else I wanted to do here in Springfield, Missouri. So that's what I chose.
Right on. Knowing
nothing about it whatsoever. I still don't know a lot about it, Tim.
Well, I would be one of those people.
I know. So I had to forestall your joke, preempt your joke.
Yeah, you cut me off at the pass there. So you joined the fire service in what year?
2012.
Okay. You started as a firefighter. You went rescue, correct?
Yeah, I came in April 2012 with 7 other dudes and all dudes in that class, and then did I want to say I promoted to rescue 5 years later, 2017.
And you've risen up. You're currently a battalion chief.
Yes, I've risen to the mighty ranks, the high summits of chiefdom.
Well, it's C shift, so let's not get too high on our horse. But
go ahead and edit in a bunch of complimentary praise for me at this point in the podcast.
I'll just be quiet for a second. All that's surely to be done. Yeah. So you're a battalion chief. You have also written some books. Have you just always been a creative person that on the side you like to read and write and do stuff like that? Or where did the sandbox writing and the Ahava decision and stuff, where did that originate from?
Yeah, I started writing little stories when I was, I must have been junior high or maybe even younger. I just have this, I've always in my brain have this memory of listening to it. There's a song by Black Sabbath called The Wizard. Okay, so take that one, maybe, loop it in here into the podcast. We can listen to it. And then as Elton John's song, Rocket Man. Mm-hmm. Those two songs inspired me at 11 or 12 to write this sci-fi story. It was god awful. It was 3 pages long, and a guy that fights a wizard in space. Who knows? But I just have always liked writing. For whatever reason, my brain communicates better in that medium than any other. So I did that, and then obviously in college I wrote a crap ton. My major was a writing heavy major, and then I got out of the SEALs. I got out of the CIA, and before I got hired at the fire department, I had free time and I was looking online, okay, I need to make some money between gigs here. And there was a website called SoftRep, which is still around, was hiring former special operations people just to write articles for it, that kind of life, and just various topics related to that. So I was like, oh, I can do this. And that's where I first started writing. And I probably wrote for them for 7-8 years, putting out anywhere from 5 to 10 articles a month. Just a lot of writing about SEAL experience. I mean, things I could write about SEAL experiences and BUDS experiences, and even random stuff like how to be a good dad. Have you ever seen it's funny now, but the trend of a Navy SEAL's guide to, shaving, there's always there's a Navy SEAL's guide for everything, mow your lawn like a Navy SEAL. I'm not proud to say I'm kind of I was in the vanguard of that trend, because all that writing started about my time with all these little articles and inspirational things. And so that was the first professional writing I ever did. And then I do that same kind of thing for Sandbox now. And then always had sci-fi stuff percolating in my head. So I self-published that short story. So I just kind of fell into it naturally.
Well, maybe you can tell me how to mow my lawn after we're done this interview. Maybe there's a tactic I'm not doing right.
Well, I wish you would have read the Navy SEAL's Guide to Podcasting before we started this, because this would be much better.
Hey, look, man, there's no ego here. If I need help, I'll take it.
No, I'm just kidding. You're great. Yeah. You're very professional.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I know that took a lot for you to say. So
yeah.
I like that. The sandbox writing, I would imagine with the Navy SEAL stuff and then the CIA stuff, you do have kind of a unique perspective on foreign policy and things of that nature. Now, I don't really do politics here on the Jobs podcast because I'm just not informed enough. But does that allow you to understand things, I guess, deeper that most folks in society just don't quite understand?
Oh, I mean, it only in the realm of, special operations and international intelligence operations. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have an insight to those things that probably most people don't have. But my major was in international affairs. So just like anyone that has spent years studying a subject, you feel like you have a good baseline of knowledge. I try not to ever be like someone that's like, you idiot, you don't merit an opinion, because anyone can have an opinion.
Yeah.
I occasionally will get irked when it's like someone's, from what I see, is an uninformed opinion, where they're just spout something, and I'll be like, that's not really how it works. People have opinions about everything. Policing is a perfect example. I'm sure you and me and everybody else has an opinion on how we should do policing, but unless you're a policeman, your opinion probably is not as valid.
Yeah. Let's shift gears to the book that you were a co-author with your father, Frank Butler, and Kevin O'Connor. Yeah. Tactical Combat Casualty Care. That, or TC3 is the acronym I've been hearing. I listened to a really good podcast interview with your dad, STEM Talk. It's another podcast. These people don't know who I am, but it was released on the 16th of January of this year, season 9, episode 177, where he talks about the origins of this book and goes into really extensive detail. Give me some, how did that kind of come about? Did your dad approach you and say, hey, this is something that happened, I really would like to document it? Or did you approach him? Or how did the storytelling in that book kind of come to be?
Yeah, my whole family has lived TCCC since its inception, which my dad was the midwife for it. He wrote the very first journal article in any kind of published medical journal that coined the phrase and that coined the concept of it back in the mid 90s. And I mean, I remember a beach vacation with my dad and my uncle, like writing that article. So it's always been around. And, just like your dad's work, anyone in a family knows what their dad does. So we've always lived and breathed it. And I had helped here and there with certain little projects, because I was in the Navy and I was trained in TCCC in the Navy. So I would give him feedback and or tell him like, oh, here's what we're doing. And then when I went to the CIA, I was like, hey, here's how it's being used at the CIA, and we could use this part of it here. And so I kind of had been around it for a long time and had done lots of stuff with him. And then it was completely his idea to write the book. His big worry was that the concepts and the entire kind of curriculum of it would get lost at post-war, like so many things do. When the war is over, you put all these things aside. You're like, okay, we don't need that anymore. Well, and his worry was that it was such a laborious bureaucratic task and research task to get it all implemented, to come up with these things and to test them and to find the right things, and to years of labor and battlefield losses really that informed it all, that he wanted to document it all in a book so that it wasn't lost to history. And then he knows obviously that he writes too. He writes journal things. So he's a really good medical journal writer. I mean, he's a brilliant guy and knows more about this subject than anyone. So he didn't need my help at all for that. But my role was making it, dumbing it down for the common person. So that was kind of what he brought me in, to make it flow and give it some more, regular style that was not a journalistic style, a medical journalistic style. Mm-hmm. So I would send back whole paragraphs and be like, hey man, I'm an EMTB and I don't understand half this paragraph. Like, I've got some medical training. So how about you tell me this in plain language? He'd send back 2 sentences that would be like, yeah, that just means you stop bleeding inside your arm quicker if you're not cold. I'm like, okay, well, let's write that. So that was kind of my role, was to try to make it more generally readable for a general reader.
And Kevin O'Connor, who is he and how does he factor into this?
Kevin O'Connor is an old family friend from special operations medicine days of my dad. So he was a surgeon, a medical physician at Delta, at the Ranger Regiment, deployed, did a bunch of combat deployments with various sort of top secret special operations units. And then I don't know how, by some sort of twist of fate, he ended up in the White House medical office years and years ago when Obama was president. And at that time, just hit it off with Joe Biden and became his personal physician while at the White House. Well, stayed in that role in the years after the Obama presidency, kind of still took care of Biden, kept him as a patient essentially. And then when Biden was elected president, he went back into the White House as the White House physician. So he worked in the White House medical unit, was the head physician for the president at the time we wrote the book. He obviously just left that position this year, a few weeks ago. So he's steeped in TCCC from his special operations medical background, and then also obviously being in the White House gives him lots of clout to get things that we thought needed to be pushed.
Right. Now, I'm not going to do the book justice by trying to dumb it down, but the general premise is the need for the 2 top tourniquets and hemostatic dressings. Is that a safe assumption?
That's where it started. The real driving force for TCCC was tourniquets. They basically figured out that they did all these medical studies and figured out, these big brains, that when people are being killed on the battlefield, like in war, from war injuries, a certain percentage of those fatalities on the battlefield were preventable. And of those preventable injuries, the injuries where you could actually save them, if you get blown to pieces, you're obviously not savable. But there are lots of injuries that you are savable. Well, they then took those preventable and the injuries that were preventable deaths and then crafted a whole system of how to treat those preventable injuries. And bleeding to death is the main one in that group. So it all started with that. And we were using tourniquets from absurdly, like the 19th century style. In Vietnam, we were using tourniquets that were like Civil War era tourniquets. So that's kind of was the driving force. Like, hey, let's get an effective tourniquet. Let's put it on every single soldier, airman, Marine, sailor that's in harm's way. And we will instantly save this many lives. And it all bore out exactly how they wanted it to. I mean, they did end up saving lives. And so there was that was the biggest driver. And then hemostatic dressings is another way to stop bleeding. So exsanguination, to use the big word for bleeding to death, that is the leading cause of preventable death on the battlefield. And those two methods were the main way of taking care of the problem. But it goes to airway also, and sucking chest wounds. And there's other injuries that they are also treating, but those were how it started.
Obviously, saving one life, it's worth it. But was there a certain percentage, or was there a random number? Like, we could save 10%, 15% of people just by applying this simple and rather inexpensive tourniquet device? Or just because we want to help people in general, it's just a better practice?
No, it was and I don't profess to be expert on the numbers, but the numbers are out there. It was a certain percentage of preventable deaths that were saved and have been saved by tourniquets. So that they really just aimed. They had, everything's data based in medical innovation. To get a new medical device, you have to base it on data. Do we need this? What is it? How effective is it? And so there was big, and that's some of the unsung heroes of TCCC were the people that did these big tourniquet studies and did these big studies that were like, there was a guy that the Ranger Regiment was a real innovator in adopting early adopters of TCCC, and they aggressively used tourniquets. And I think their number that they documented, don't quote me on it, was around 3,000 lives they had saved with tourniquet use. From the period of like 2001 to 2020 or something. It was a lot. I mean, it's a percentage of all those injuries. I mean, the percentages bared out essentially.
Yeah, that's a substantial number.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's for something that's so simple. I mean, it's a simple device. Anybody can put it on.
I don't know where I got this rattling around in my head, but for some reason I remember there was a branch of the military that was impregnating tourniquets into the uniforms.
I don't know if that has fully been done. I know they were talking about doing it. So whether or not those are effective, I don't know. I haven't seen that recent. That'd be real recent literature that I haven't seen. So that's an innovation. They all carry them. Another junctional, let's not get super nerdy, but junctional tourniquets, when you get a gunshot wound to the groin, your listeners may not know there's tons of vessels in the groin, blood vessels, and it's really hard to stop that bleeding. So for years, they've been trying to get a tourniquet that's a groin tourniquet, essentially. That's actually closer now than it ever has been. So those kind of innovations have impregnated in the uniform and the junctionals. They continue apace because really smart people are putting time and effort towards it, which is all part of the reason he wanted to write the book and, say, hey, we've still got a ways to go to make this permanent and effective.
When you have an idea like that and they want to implement something such as the tourniquets in the uniforms, is that something that you will typically see in the special forces first before it's more widespread?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's a bureaucratic function and also a cultural mindset. So the special operations community and especially the more secretive part of it has a little bit more free reign, bureaucratically speaking, money-wise, to go purchase things and to try things that the regular military just can't do through their supply system. Essentially, it boils down to that. It's just a lot easier for them to go just say like, hey, this piece of gear looks pretty awesome. We're going to buy it and test it out. And then if it works, we'll start using it. And then like anything else, people that work around the special operations community start seeing that gear and start thinking like, oh, that's pretty nifty. Like, oh, we should get that. And then it just kind of percolates out from there. So it is a kind of a testing and evaluation section of the military in that way. And it always has been, really.
The title of the book that you co-wrote with your dad and Kevin O'Connor, it was Tell Them Yourself It's Not Your Day to Die. And that was based on the story of Tactical Combat Casualty Care, or TC3.
Yep.
Where did that title, do you know where the title came about? That's pretty specific of a title.
Yeah, it was a medic on the battlefield, and he was treating a victim, a gunshot wound, or I think it was a gunshot wound. And the classic, you see it in movies, war movies and stuff, and it really happens. The guy who's thought he was about to die basically said, "Tell my family I love them. Like, hey, tell my wife and kids I love them, and I died doing what I love." One of those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And so the medic answered back, "No, tell them yourself. You can tell them yourself. We're going to save you." That's where it came from. The title came from. Wow. Yeah, and that was a real story that I believe Kevin O'Connor was the one that came up with. I know it was him that came up with it. I just don't remember who the person was he was talking about, but he knew that story, and we all agree. It took us a long time to come up with the title. That was like, we spent a long time on it, and we all kind of agreed, well, like, this is really good. Let's use this. And it kind of conveys the whole sense of the book, is getting people that are injured on the battlefield back home to their families was really what we wanted to do.
Your dad started this back in the 90s, so this was decades from start to finish of this whole TC3 thing. And he was recently awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by the United States government, the White House, and the president.
That is correct, yeah, for a lifetime of service.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal. They don't give that one out very often, do they?
No, it's like the Presidential Medal of Freedom. There's 2 civilian awards that the president can give out, and the Medal of Freedom is one, and the Citizens Medal is the other. It's really just up to the president and how often he wants to give them out. There's no set number every year.
Well, I haven't gotten mine for podcasting just yet, but any day now, I'm sure that'll...
I'm sure the invite is in the mail.
Absolutely.
It's sitting in the post office in Cassville.
Oh, yeah. So let's kind of shift gears and talk about some tactics or some advice that you would give folks as far as the soft skills. If someone wanted to get into the military and they wanted to be in special forces, if someone wanted to take the CIA route, if someone wants to get into the fire service, are there a few character traits or skill sets that they need to develop that will allow them to most likely be successful in any of those? I mean, there's some similarities there.
Right. Soft skills, absolutely. They're all very different careers, but I've probably said it to you before, but I've told lots of people that they're also all very similar, and that they have a really well-defined mission. The people that tend to gravitate towards them are sort of service-oriented or mission-oriented, people that want to feel like they're accomplishing things. In life. That I feel like that's been the case for all 3 of those, and they take a high degree of motivation, just self-motivation. And you don't get a lot of, insert funny fire department joke here, but you don't get a lot of people that come into those careers that are like, here I am, I'm just kind of here to coast. I mean, they may get to that point later in their careers, they get jaded, but they all join up in all 3 of those fields to make a difference and to either help people or help the country or serve the community, the local community. And so that's the main thing. It's really just everybody I think kind of knows if they have that burning desire to kind of serve. Like, I think that's just something you're almost born with. I don't know that that's something you can learn. You can certainly see it exemplified in other people and be like, oh, I'd like to do that. They seem to really enjoy their life and their career. But that was the main thing, is just the motivation to want to do a job like that, where you're not going to work for the paycheck, God knows, every day. Yeah. There's something else that's driving you to, and I don't mean to denigrate people that do make a large paycheck and work in, finance or something. Some people love, my brother's in finance and absolutely loves it, and it's his passion. So part of it's knowing yourself, what your own passion is. And then I would say one of the main things you have to develop is, once you decide, okay, this is my passion, you've just got to go for it with everything you have and just be like, that's what I'm going to do. And no one's going to stop me. I'm going to master all the things I need to master to become this one thing. And not ever, I think there's plenty of people in life that tell you can't do things, like I can't even count how many times in college people would ask, like, oh, what are you going to, like, people that weren't even in ROTC or just regular college students, what are you going to do in the Navy? I'll be like, oh, I want to be a SEAL. And they would just look at me like, you idiot. You're like $160. No tan. You don't look like a Hollywood SEAL, Charlie Sheen, or any of that stuff. Like, no chance. But every single person almost that I would tell that to would be like, okay, whatever, man. I might as well have been saying, I'm gonna be a professional wrestler.
Right.
They just would look at you like, but you can't let that, if you let other people's doubt become your doubt, then obviously you're never going to make it in life. So
Sure.
that was a big part of it, is just self-motivation and almost having a super belief in your own, at least desire. It doesn't mean you're not going to fail. I've failed at plenty of things, but you at least have to have the desire to try.
Well, parlaying that into the next question is, I always ask, what's your advice on dealing with failure? Because, we all make mistakes. Sometimes they're big ones, sometimes they're little ones. I would imagine in the military, if you make a mistake, they beat it into your head with endless running and push-ups where you can't help ever forget it, or you'll never forget it. But when you get older in the CIA, how was failure dealt with? In the fire department, I'm familiar with it, but
Right. Yeah. Well, so I almost failed out of buds. I had a horrible sinus infection during first phase. So it didn't, and I was able to fight through it with meds and whatever, and it was fine. But except for this one thing we had to do called drown proofing, where they tie you up your feet and your hands, and you jump in the pool, and then you do all these series of tasks while you're all tied up in the water. So you have to like swim down and back, and then bob up and down, and pick up a mask with your mouth, and then do a somersault. All these stupid things just to make sure you're comfortable in the water. I mean, essentially tying you up and throwing your feet and hands up and throwing you in the water is a pretty good way to make sure you're comfortable in the water. And I was at that time, and I still am, but I couldn't breathe out of my nose. And so I had the part where I had this mask in my mouth and had to do these somersaults. If you drop the mask at any point, like you fail that part and you have to go back down and get it, or you run out of time or whatever. Well, they only give you multiple, a few chances in buds to do all these things that you have to do, like the 50-meter underwater swim and the obstacle course times. You have to make those times, and they give you a couple chances. And if you don't, they roll you out, or they kick you out. They roll you back, meaning you start with the next class, or they kick you out. So I was on my final attempt for this thing because I just couldn't breathe. I was like, I cannot do this. And I was like, F it, I'm just going to do it. And I'll just inhale a bunch of water and just drown, and it'll be fine. Like, at least I will have died trying. And I somehow miraculously did it. But it was still like, there was two of us that needed, 3 opportunities to pass. Like everybody else passed on their first or second, so that the two of us, that was towards the end of first phase. We had a couple weeks left. And for those last 2 weeks, they made both of us wear a life jacket all day, every day, 24, all day. We had to run around with life jackets on just because we had, you know what I mean? Like, they're like, these guys can't do it, and it's essentially wearing a thing that says failure, across your chest with a bunch of dudes that you're trying to be like classmates. So it's good in the sense that it does teach you, like, everybody fails at something in life. I don't care who you are. If you're the most successful person in the world, you have failures to look at, and you just have to learn from them and like embrace them and be like, well, yep, that sucked. And now how am I going to avoid that next time? And if it's a big failure, like say I had failed out of buds, like I was mentally prepared for that. Obviously I wasn't going to quit, but say I just failed out. There was already a part of my brain that was like, okay, you gave it everything you had, you tried your hardest, you did your best, and you didn't make it. Like I wasn't going to, you know what I mean? I wasn't going to have some sort of existential come apart. I mean, I would have been upset, but you also you have to be you have to give yourself some forgiveness, I think, in life. You're not going to succeed at everything. No one is. And if you let that make you scared to try things, then you're never going to succeed in great things. And at the same time, if you do fail in some of those, you just got to accept it. I'm like a Zen philosopher, Tim.
I've always said that about you.
I know. That's a common refrain that I hear a lot.
There's other things I say about you, but it's not broadcastable. So
I don't know if I conveyed that well enough, but yeah, you just got to be willing to accept it.
No, you did. Your early influence, you said you knew from a pretty early age that you wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Your father's influence, or do you have other family members? It seems like on the fire service, my dad was a fireman, my uncle was a fireman. It's just kind of a generational thing. Is the Navy SEAL line, is that the same, or do you have a lot of people just come out of left field and go like, I'm going to do that?
I don't think it's as common in the SEALs to have a bunch of family members. But that being said, it is somewhat common because I'm the fifth. I'm one of 5 in my family. But before me, there was already 3 before me. So yes, that helped quite a bit because I knew, okay, these 3 guys that I know can do it. I know those guys. They're nothing special. That's my dad. So like in a sense, that was great because I didn't see them as supermen. Like everyone around me did. So I would always hear like my friends or other people, like at the Naval Hospital in Pensacola where my dad worked. I would go in there occasionally for whatever reason to visit him or something. And it was always like this reverential, like, oh, he wears a SEAL trident. Like that guy was a Navy SEAL. And I was like, what? Why are these people so worked up about this? So like, I never had that sense of awe that a lot of people have about anything like someone that wants to be like a professional baseball player. I'm sure if you come from, if you're Bo Jackson or Mark McGuire's kid, it seems much less daunting to you because you've probably heard the stories about how you get to that point, what it takes, like the pitfalls. So a lot of it wasn't a mystery to me. It was quite helpful, yes. But there's plenty of people. The great majority just come as the first ones in their family and just go for it. That's in a sense much more impressive than me coming from a family that knew all about it and had lots of inside knowledge.
It seems more achievable when you're raised around folks that have done it and you know them well. It's like, oh, all right, well,
yeah, absolutely,
I can do it, as opposed to this mystique that it does have. I mean, that's not everybody can do it, so it's certainly something that we should hold up and honor. But
right. But it also, though, in one sense, I also knew how hellish it was going to be. So I didn't get the benefit of the not knowing. My dad would be like, you're going to be real cold. You get that, right? Like my uncle, that was almost what got him. And it gets most people the cold. The cold just is unbearable to some people. I knew that was going to be miserable. So I had that to look forward to for 5 years.
You've got 5 family members. Is that a record?
I think it is a record. I believe we're sitting in the lead. I think there's one other family with 4, but I don't know that for sure.
Are they nipping at your heels?
Sorry, I have no idea. I don't even know who it is. I don't stay that close. The community is so insular. People just don't really know that stuff. Some people do, and then I've just heard tell that we have the most at this point.
Well, who else besides your father and your uncle and you?
My dad's cousin was the first one to go through, and then my dad, and then my uncle, and then me, and then my cousin has an active duty SEAL now.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. He's the only active duty guy we have. But, there's other chances, Tim. There's still more out there. Which always butlers running around everywhere.
Would you say that your dad was your main mentor for someone that shaped your early career, or did you have some other people when you got away from your dad and into the military where you're kind of forging your own path? Did you have some mentors that stepped up and kind of guided you or gave you some really good advice? Besides
of course. Yeah, right. You notwithstanding. The military part of it, my dad and uncle definitely helped me the most and kind of taught me the ropes. But the CIA, I didn't know. I had never had a single member of my family or anyone part of that. So that was kind of me on my own. I did meet, obviously, people there that were mentors, absolutely, that helped me out and taught me the ropes there. But then in the fire service, same thing. I didn't have anything to draw on other than just the people around me. So I think mentors are very important and great, but you just got to make them, and you got to almost kind of, how it is. You got to choose who you're going to emulate, and almost more importantly, who you're not going to emulate.
Sure. Well, some people can teach you a lot of stuff, but just usually about what not to do.
Right. So, the lightning rods.
Was there another career? I mean, you've had 3 essentially, and then 4 if you count the author side of things. But is there a career that you always thought, that would be really fun, or have you done what you feel you were born to do?
No, I was 100% born to be a singer-songwriter and a famous musician. Seriously, if I had that talent, and I've tried writing songs, and I play the guitar, and I'm okay, but if I had that talent, that would have been choice number 1 from the get-go.
Well, if polka makes a resurgence.
Oh, no. Why would you do that to me? I don't play polka.
No.
More of a soft rock guy, Tim.
Right.
Yeah. Folk country.
Yeah. The tender side of the Navy SEALs. Yeah.
That's right.
So your books, the Ahava Decision and the book that you co-wrote, those can be found on Amazon, and are they Kindle and hardback or both?
Yeah, you can get all of those in Kindle, hardback, softback. You can also get the Tell Them Yourself on the Joint Special Operation Medical website, JSOM. They're actually the publishers of it, Breakaway Media, but it's available on Amazon as well.
Okay. Very cool. Hey,
yeah,
I was looking forward to this interview. You've got a pretty unique story, and It's always nice to talk with you, even though you're sometimes...
I don't think you really mean it's always nice to talk to me, Tim. I feel like that's a platitude right now.
Well, I know your love language is rather aggressive, so let's put it that way.
It does all come from a place of love. I thoroughly enjoyed talking today.
Well, thanks for your time, Jeff. I really appreciate it. I will see you next shift.
That's right. I'll see you soon.
All right, buddy. Have a good day.
Thanks, Tim. See ya.
Bye. And that wraps up another episode of the Jobs Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hopefully you found that interesting. As always, I wait until the end of an interview to ask you to like, subscribe, and share. I feel it's important that I earn that support from you. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.